Let's bring up our transportation panel. Panelists, please come up. And our moderator will be a professor here actually at NJIT, professor of informatics, and which is very fitting relative to the discussion. So Yvette Wan, do you want to, let me see, yes, you can either sit right here, you can panel from up here, whichever your choice.
Okay.
So
maybe it'll be easier to see you if I'm like standing over here.
Sure. You want to sit? I can get you a chair.
No, I'm
okay. Yeah.
Here,
I'll bring it over.
All right.
There you go. And I'm going to give you this. Let's give it up for Yvette and our panel.
We're going to get mic'd up. But just to kind of see who we have in the room, could you raise your hands if you're a developer, a designer, management, data scientist? Who am I missing? Academics? Okay, great. We have a really great panel for you today. We have people representing very diverse areas of transportation, and very excited, and I hope this will be very fun for you too. We're going to try to keep it interactive. Is there a mic runner for people who have questions? Yeah, let's give you and we'll take that. Oh, okay.
And you can take that one.
Excellent. All right. Great. Did we want to keep standing or?
No.
Please, have a seat. All right. Great. So, as mentioned earlier, my name is Yvette Wan. I'm a professor here at New Jersey Institute of Technology. My research area is human-computer interaction, and I'll be moderating your panel today. First, I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves and tell us why they're on this panel and what their expertise is in relation to voice in transportation context.
Hi, I'm John Kelvie. I'm the CEO of Bespoken. We build automated testing and monitoring tools for voice apps. And we have a particular interest in-car experiences and transportation. A lot of it based on our work with Mercedes, who's actually on this panel with us, as well as with other car manufacturers. And so we think it's a great topic, and we also, from the perspective of people that build automated testing tools, we obviously think that quality is essential for it. So our particular interest with it is, okay, for this critical use case, are we making sure that it really works great? So we're delighted to talk about it and be part of this panel.
Great, thank you.
My name is Letha Mclaren. I am the head of product for CloudCar. We are a infotainment company. We deliver a platform that does infotainment of cloud-based services. So a lot of the work that we do is in the cloud, but then we also have a thin client SDK where automotive OEMs can build into the ecosystem of their car these connected cloud services. So the reason why we're interested, obviously, is voice is a key piece of the interaction for inside the vehicle. Obviously, you still need some sort of visual indication from your screens inside your vehicle, but voice is obviously very important, and being able to quickly and easily in a distraction-free way get to the value of these services inside the vehicle is something that we focus on and why we are here today.
Hi, I'm Jochen. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Onsai. We're a small company based in Berlin, and we pretty much specialized on public transportation in general when it came to voice. So we helped public transportation companies, ride-sharing companies, in getting into the voice space. Today we work with in-car experiences, outside-car experiences, and together with third-party people who try to get into cars as well as with car manufacturers.
Hi, I'm Nick Schwab. I'm the CEO and founder of Invoked Apps, a Alexa skill and Google Actions making company. And by day, I'm a senior software engineer at Ford Motor Company working on software to allow third-party smartphone application developers to extend their applications into the vehicle.
Hi everyone, my name is Robert. I'm a software engineer for Mercedes-Benz Research and Development North America. So I've been working for Mercedes for more than 4 years now, previously in Germany and Stuttgart, where I was also accompanying our web platform for our first version of connected cars. And now for a little more than a year, I'm working in Silicon Valley and Sunnyvale for a team which tries to integrate IoT technology with our connected cars. And with that, we are also doing speech and voice integration. So what we are, for example, doing in our team is integrating the Alexa or Google Assistant technology with our Mercedes-Benz cars, both in and outside the car.
Great, thank you so much. As you can see, we have a lot of diverse perspectives covered here in our panel today. I want to start off with a little bit of a generic question. How is voice technology being applied currently in the transportation industry, either generically or in your own company?
I mean, I can start. So I think, first of all, you have to differentiate between where you want to communicate with your car. You could be inside your car, you could be right next to your car, or you could be at home, or even on the go with your mobile phone, right? Think about the Google Assistant on your phone or Siri. And for all of these use cases, there are already solutions out there. Now, speaking maybe a little more from the Mercedes side, we offer a solution right now inside the car, which we developed ourselves with our partner Nuance, which is called MBUX. And you can trigger it with your own keyword. So instead of Alexa inside your car, you're actually saying, "Hey Mercedes." And by that, you are able to interact with your car, which also has its own personality. But of course, that doesn't make sense outside of the car, right? Because you probably already have an Alexa or a Google Home device in your living room. So for that, we and other automotive OEMs are offering skills. So you can actually also interact with your car from your living room. Yeah? Think about use cases, for example, like you're waking up in the morning, it's cold outside, and you want to precondition your car. So you could just say, "Alexa, ask Mercedes to start the AC," and by the time you're done with your breakfast and you arrive at your car, it's already preconditioned.
I'll go next. So at Ford, we kind of take an application approach. So inside the car, we have the Ford plus Alexa app or the Lincoln plus Alexa app that allows you to use Alexa in your car. So you open up the app you have the app on your phone, and you get into your car, connects via Bluetooth, and then that app, the Alexa app, shows up in the vehicle. And that allows you to then use the Alexa hot word to activate Alexa and say any Alexa voice command you want. And then at home, as you were saying, there's a different app, the Ford Pass app. And that allows you to get stats on your car, like how much fuel you have left, or even start your car with a passcode for security.
Then I'll continue. As we just heard, we have, for example, Alexa in the car, we have it at home. What we help companies with is deciding how to engage the user in the different experiences. So when you're in car, we might limit you to some information that you get from third-party tool. For example, we're working with one company where you can be able to pay tolls while you're in the car on the road. You can also just do this from home, but at home we're going to ask different information from you. So this is really where we're helping companies with to do both experiences in a better way.
So I will try to say things that haven't been said already. So different maybe for the way we look at it versus maybe an app-based voice interaction approach is that we try to develop our platform in a way that isn't app-centric. So it's more around specific use cases to get things done. So instead of having to say, for instance, play me Madonna on Spotify or play me Madonna on some particular source, a user can just say play me Madonna, and our application, again, we're not actually an ASR or the NLU, so we are really just taking intent that comes from somewhere and mapping it to various providers to get back the information. And so we will get information from lots of different places. It's very personalized for the end user because because, for instance, maybe I am a Spotify user, but I'm not an Amazon Music user. So the information is actually going to come back from the provider that I've configured in my system. But again, you don't have to necessarily think about, we're not requesting the users to think about it in an app-based approach. They're really just thinking about it in a task-based approach. So again, another example might be, find me the nearest coffee shop that's open right now nearest me, versus finding it from some specific place. And actually that result could come back from your navigation system, which we're not a content provider. So we're going out querying navigation systems. We're going out querying Yelp to find the best user ratings and maybe comparing that against the open times and getting that information, extracting things that don't make sense for that request, and then presenting that back to the hedge unit that is built, again, kind of outside of our ecosystem. So we're just the SDK that provides the services, and then some person who sits on top of us, typically the person who designs the HMI, for instance, or the head unit architecture, is delivering that information back to the end user. So a little bit different, because we're not trying to map it one-to-one for apps, but really thinking about the task that the driver is trying to accomplish and mapping it against whatever provider makes sense for that particular task.
Yeah, so these are all fantastic use cases. I think you guys covered a lot of the best scenarios that I can think of. The one other thing that I find very interesting that's in addition to the connected car and in-car experiences, and that we've seen a little bit of, is the personalization. So when you're getting into the car, to have the ability to have it attuned to you as the particular user, your preferences, your particular configuration, your music service. We think those are terrific things that we see coming down the pipe, and really being something that you can look for in the car that's going to make an even better experience.
Would you say that designing or developing for cars are a different context than home? What are some things that you have to think about that make the context very different from an in-home voice device, for example?
So I'll happily go first on this one. We were discussing this before this panel, and I did think that in the car, there's a possibility for people to do UX-wise some things that they might not normally do. And I base this on, I do like to pick on Mercedes, for example, where I think people have a special relationship with car brands, maybe even more than they might have with something like Alexa, and they have a bond with it, and they might be more open to the device initiating communication with them, asking them something like, where do you want to go today? Or did you know there's a problem with the route? Or, a coffee shop you like is nearby, that sort of thing. In general, interrupting the users is somewhat controversial, but I think that's a neat aspect for the car, and there's some possibilities there that I think are really quite neat.
And going a little further to that, I think the key differentiator, or a key differentiator, is that within the vehicle you have a lot more context than you have maybe at home, right? Because at home you could be cooking something in the kitchen, you're watching something on TV, you're in a different room. There's a lot of different use cases, one that you would use voice for, but also just you could be doing a lot of different things. Versus in the vehicle, yes, you could be a passenger, but generally these are geared towards the driver's use cases. And as the driver, you're trying to get somewhere, right? And that's your primary goal of being inside the vehicle. And then there's a lot more context about what's going on around you that you can get from the vehicle itself. So I think the context makes it quite different than inside the house, where the context is much brighter and you have to kind of narrow into a particular use case, versus in the vehicle you have, again, it's a narrower set of use cases.
Maybe adding on this context thing, you can easily think about then things being triggered by your current context, right? Think about you're low on gas, for example. And then right now, you probably already know in a few car models, you already have that. In your head unit, you get this pop-up, hey, you're low on gas. Do you want to search for the nearest gas station? And then you get a huge list on your touchscreen, which of course causes a lot of driver distraction, right? Because if you go through this list now, no, this gas station is like 10 miles away, or no, I also don't want this one. So there's an easy potential, and when it comes to driver distraction, where voice can really make a difference for this trigger things which are coming from the context of the car. Yeah. Think also about warning lights, or what we also have, for example, the Mercedes, is that we kind of detect if you're getting tired and you should make it do a break. And then you could think that the voice assistant will ask you, hey, we just noticed that you're getting tired. Do you want to look for a coffee shop nearby or some resting place or something like that? And this is how you basically can play with the context you can get from the car. And maybe to add 2 more things on top of that, one would be, and this is something where a lot of people don't think about, is that at home you almost always have good internet connectivity, right? With a car, this is often not the case. Of course, if you're driving through the city, this is okay, and you can probably send everything to the cloud. But coming from a German automotive company, I can assure you, even in Germany, you have a lot of rural areas where you really have low connectivity. And maybe you still want to use your navigation system in that case. And because you're used to that, and you cannot really understand that if you enter the car and you say, hey, I want to drive to my grandma, that all of a sudden it says, no connectivity, I cannot start navigation, right? So you should also think about these use cases and come up with some embedded technology as well, at least for some central aspects and some central use cases. And then maybe coming from another direction, what actually is better or working better at a smart home, where I think in the automotive industry we can kind of extend, is this platform thinking. You're probably used to that from Alexa, that you have this whole smart home feature set where you can kind of do your own routines, you can collect your own groups and stuff like that. And right now, this is not really the case for any automotive thing, right? You could think about maybe I can trigger different car functionalities in my own routine, and for that, like, train my own in-car voice assistant. And this is definitely a field where will happen more in the near future.
Do you think that the nature of conversations is different in the car context? Like, if you gave it the same question, should the answer be different when the person is in the car versus at home?
Depends on the question.
Yeah, it depends on the question.
I mean, certainly if it's a question that has would have the same context, then there probably shouldn't be differences. But generally, again, the way we think about the use cases for the vehicle, I mean, we kind of group them into what we call these kind of domain areas. And like one of them would be places. When you're inside your car, you intend to go somewhere. You want to navigate, you want to be able to find establishments or businesses or schools, whatever you're trying to do from a place perspective. We have a domain that we call media. So when you're inside the vehicle, you tend to want to play some sort of music, or maybe not music, maybe it's an audiobook or some podcast, or you want to do something with the audio system inside the vehicle. We also think about another domain as knowledge, which gets kind of close to what you're maybe asking, which is you just get in your car and expect to ask a question. If you ask a sports question at home, what's the latest sports score of the 49ers, then you should get the same response from both systems, right? Because it doesn't have any necessarily context to the vehicle. But certainly as people become more and more familiar and more comfortable talking to these assistants, they expect to be able to get into the car and ask these basic type questions. I mean, my son gets into the car every morning and expects to talk to the car and get an answer like he does from Alexa when he's at home. So I mean, I think there is an expectation that to some degree some of those answers are going to be the same. We also think about a use case around smart home. So being able to, again, there's some use cases that we think make sense from the vehicle. Maybe as you're leaving your house, you want to lock the doors and turn down the lights. And as you're approaching home, you may want to unlock the door, open the garage, things like that. So there's some use cases in there that we think make sense for connectivity to your home. And then we have one last domain around people. So being able to communicate with other people outside the vehicle while you're inside the vehicle. So messaging or calling or texting or Facebook whatever, what kind of communication medium you want to communicate with somebody outside the car. Maybe you want to share your location with them, things like that. So, and for us, we think about these use cases because of a couple of ways. One, we want to connect the cloud-based content to those use cases so that when somebody gets in the car, they can just do these tasks very easily with their preferred provider, whether it's Yelp or Amazon Music or whatever. But also, they want to be able to use voice and interact with those to get those tasks done. And so that's kind of why we group it into these kind of areas of functionality that we think cover, I mean, again, from the vehicle's perspective, quite a bit of use cases.
That's really interesting. Nick, I have a question for you. What makes voice in cars so compelling, and why is it such an exciting field for you specifically?
The context of location is a huge one, I think. So just think about it as you're driving. The ability to say, like, Alexa, what's the speed limit? You can't do that right now anywhere. Like your cars aren't really connected to the internet, or at least not yet. I mean, it's a work in progress, obviously. And then taking that one step further, what if you're on a route, you're taking a long trip across the country, and you need to stop for gas, or you need to make a pit stop somewhere? You could just say, Alexa, I need fuel, I need gas. And it could say, oh, there's a stop 3 miles away, it's only a half a mile off of your current path, right? It'll only take you 5 extra minutes. That context of location in the home with Alexa and Google Actions, you assign a static location to your devices, but in the car, location is changing constantly. It's going to play a huge factor in voice experiences.
Jochen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly what's happening, and I kind of want to take the earlier question with that as well. So right now, what we see when people start using Alexa in cars or Google Home in cars, or the Google Assistant, actually the answers are the same right now. So there's not many developers who really customize their skills for in-car experiences. They don't take advantage of these extra context they get. And this is, I think, where we need to go somewhere. So I think initially, when more and more people get the devices in their cars or access to the services in their cars, we're going to see that the answers they get are the same. But what we've been pushing right now, and I think what we're doing with all our skills or actions we have out there, is really customizing them for car experiences, changing the answers you get, depending on where you are, depending on all the context information we get, to shorten them, because we don't need to ask you where you're going or where you are right now. We already know this. To also make it less distracting for the driver, to have the driver think less while he's, driving.
Would anyone else like to add to that?
Yeah, maybe adding also to the question, why is it so compelling? Yeah, and I mean, if you think back, Mercedes was one of the first automotive companies, or was the first in 1996 to come up with a voice assistant system, the Linguatronic voice system in an S-Class, and it makes sense because of two big advantages of voice. Yeah? The first one is actually it's hands-free. And this is obviously a huge advantage in the car because you need your hands for driving. And then the second one, it's intuitive. And I think the second one will be something which will get more and more relevant in the future, because moving forward with autonomous vehicles and also just ride sharing, right? Maybe you don't own your car anymore, you don't know it anymore that well, right? It's already happening today with rental car companies, or think Turo, right? For private car sharing and private car rental. Honestly, you end up oftentimes in a car which you're not familiar with. And then this intuitive part is a huge advantage. If I can just ask the car, hey, where can I find this and this? Or how do I operate this functionality in this car? Or do I have this and this feature? Stuff like that, without having to look up a huge user manual and stuff like that. And this is, for example, something we're currently working on also with Mercedes, but obviously it makes sense to have this in every car, and to kind of not only play this hands-free advantage you get with voice technology, but also the intuitive part.
Yeah, safety is a huge factor. I mean, imagine taking a road trip, and how many of you listen to the radio while you're on a long road trip? I mean, you lose your radio station, right? And it's a pain in the butt. Like, you gotta now just keep tuning to find that next radio station that you want. But if you could just say, Alexa, play rock music, and it automatically tunes, like, that's a huge safety feature right there, because now you keep both hands on the wheel, you're not messing with the tuner anymore. That's just one example of how voice makes cars safer.
And it's going to work the same way in Mercedes and in Ford in this case, because you ask for a radio station. You don't have to know how the radio works. You don't have to know where the tuning button is. You ask for it, and it's going to come up. So that's what I like about the intuitive part. We don't need to get familiar with any the car as much as we need to anymore. If it's your own car, it's no problem getting familiar. You probably know every function. But as a person, I use car sharing a lot. I have a lot of rental cars. I put one radio station in, and that's it. I'm happy.
I mean, I think those are all great points. So having worked in speech recognition for some time, I mean, the use case in the car to me is one of the most compelling, if not the most compelling applications of it. the safety considerations are just immense, and it's, I think I saw a study recently that said for the consoles, a lot of them are going in the wrong direction. You know, there's too many buttons, there's too many options, it's too easy to distract people. And voice is really the solution to that. And as someone who's a fairly cautious driver, who has a young daughter, I mean, you know, cutting down on distracted driving, I think I don't know, it's something to feel excited about.
If I may add one more point, because this is also heading in one direction, which you also really need to think about. I mean, voice right now is more like a hammer, right? And if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But think about, would you like to control your Excel spreadsheet with voice? You probably won't, right? And it's the same in the car. Right? You don't want to put things like the gear shift, let's say, via voice, right? Because it's much quicker to kind of pull the lever or your stick shift to reverse than saying something like, hey, Mercedes or Alexa, put in the reverse gear. So you really also have to think about where it makes sense. Voice certainly doesn't make sense for everything. And especially for a car, I also think it's oftentimes necessary to have kind of haptic feedback, right? To kind of feel a button or, and a push of a button oftentimes is still today faster than a voice command, yeah? If the button is easily reachable or maybe on the steering wheel or something. So even in this context, you really have to think hard where do you want to apply voice and where it makes really sense.
To piggyback on that, what do you think are some unique challenges for designing for voice in cars?
One that was already touched on, which is not all cars are connected today, and even if the car is connected, not always with a reliable connection. Cars move, they're mobile all the time, they go in and out of coverage. And so obviously that presents some challenges for a voice interface, much of which are solved with having some sort of hybrid design where you've got some local voice capability that doesn't require connectivity, but then using cloud when it makes sense. So there's certainly some challenges around connectivity because people get used to, Alexa always being connected inside your house, and that's just not always the case in the car.
Shifting gears a little bit, I think that transportation is very interesting because compared to homes, it's subject to a lot of different types of regulations that might vary depending on what country you're in. And so I was wondering, what are some things you need to be cognizant about when building for a global customer base?
I mean, obviously the first one would be language. So if you want to introduce such a system in different markets, you really have to think about language coverage. And even now, if you look at Alexa, there are a lot of languages which are not covered yet. So this is one aspect if you would think about which ecosystem you should be choosing as an automotive OEM. And then another one is, of course, also regulations. Yeah? For example, we have some Near Eastern countries where female voices are actually not considered as a good choice for navigation systems and stuff like that. So you also need to consider these kind of cultural things and then introduce maybe some kind of customization or even market-specific solutions to have a male voice for these countries. And from other perspectives, though, actually voice, I think, is a huge advantage when it comes to other systems because it gives less driver distraction than, for example, a touchscreen. And so actually by introducing voice functionality for a lot of use cases, you kind of avoid some regulations and some problems you have if you introduce them only on the UI, let's say.
One thing that we run into also is not only language, but just the intent, being able to identify the intent in other languages and even the way the sentences are structured and things like that are quite different. And then as we try to map intent to content, maybe like in China, for instance, the different attributes for different types of pieces of like media or places or things like that. So there's intent differences across languages as well as how it gets mapped to the actual content is quite different. And so again, that just creates kind of a challenge around being able to have a global footprint and making sure that it works and you test it adequately in all the different languages and all the different regions.
Yeah, you should definitely test very carefully in all the different languages.
service. No.
Just use this. Yeah.
And think of an experience in the home, you might be willing to hear a list of 3 or 4 items before you make a selection. But in a car, since you're driving, you don't want to distract the user, so you need to keep your list smaller. Only give them 1 or 2 options, right? Just keeping the experiences even more simple is going to be a key in voice in the vehicle.
And then also thinking about the different markets, there are already tons of ecosystems out there, right? I mean, right now in the US market, it's all Alexa and Google. And this is also true for most of Europe. But then think about the Chinese market, for example. You have systems there from Alibaba, Tencent, the Ling Long Ding Dong system and everything. So if you want to introduce these ecosystems in your car, you even have to adapt to different market situations. Yesterday I learned we have Alice in Russia. So there's almost every country which is not as influenced by Western culture has its own ecosystem. And now being a global manufacturer like Mercedes, you really have to take this into consideration as well if you want to merge different ecosystems in your in-car experience.
Until now, we've talked mostly about private vehicles, so I want to shift the focus a little bit to other types of transportation, such as ride shares or public transportation. Jochen, can you start the discussion on that?
Okay, so like I said at the beginning, we do a lot with public transportation. Obviously, usually this journey starts at home when you try to find out where the nearest kind of public transportation is available to you, when you want to find out what is leaving next, what's the best way to get somewhere. And this is something really where voice is fantastic. Because you can simply ask complicated questions on how to get from place A to place B at a certain time with a certain transportation type and get fairly good information back. What's important here, and that's what we do with all our tools, is try to be part of an ecosystem. So don't think just, okay, because you asked it at home, that the information stays at home, because when you get the response, make sure the user also gets the response somewhere else in the ecosystem where you can then later on reflect on it. Because if we tell you a list of 10 different transportation types you need to do, you know, nobody's going to remember it. So try to be part of the ecosystems that are out there. Maybe push it to a cell phone that a person has with him or something like that. The other thing that's really interesting to us is obviously also car sharing, ride sharing, and this is what we also touched on in the beginning a little bit. Try to keep it general so that, you know, it doesn't matter what car manufacturer you use, what infrastructure you're using, so that you can really go from place A to place B with the same voice commands that are fairly general. Try to stay away from the company language a little bit more and go, you know, the language is actually spoken on the street when we're talking about public transportation. You know, for us a big challenge was to really identify city points in different cities that what people said compared to the actual names of them. Sometimes these were names that the names were changed, and in all official records it's a new name now, but we still had to understand the old names because, yeah, they're still part of the language. So, you know, we try to keep it really general so that anybody can use it, and it's intuitive. That's what we're trying to get out of it.
Kind of on that note, nowadays we have apps like Uber and Lyft where we request a ride, right, using our smartphones. But if you think about the most natural way to hail a vehicle is just a traditional taxi. If there are cars everywhere where you can just walk out to the street and flag one down, you don't need a phone. You just literally walk out there and use your hand, right? But then when you get to that point, you know, we're getting rid of keys. Eventually we're going to get rid of phones with voice. We already got rid of maps, right? So what happens when you literally no longer have a wallet and you no longer have a phone and you just get in a car because it's autonomous and you wave it down? So how do you pay, right? So with voice profiles and voice recognition, I think that's going to be a huge player in being able to pay for your ride. Just before it lets you out of the car, you just say, Alexa, pay for my ride. Oh, your ride was $14.72. All right, sure. Put it on my Discover card. Done.
And I mean, something that's similar to that, Jochen, that you were telling us about. I mean, you guys do the toll paying now, or you're going to be doing the toll paying in Germany using the voice. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, so that's, you know, exactly. So we're going to be doing toll pay in all of Europe in it's going to be released in German language first thing. So that imagine you're driving down the road and you're driving from Germany to Austria, and all of a sudden you see the sign like, okay, please go in this traffic jam lane to pay for your toll. Instead of that, you can just be like, hey Alexa, can I buy a toll for 10 days for Austria? And go through the Amazon Pay verification, and yeah, you have your toll linked to your license plate number, and you can keep on going. You don't have to stop to pay for it. I mean, these are the things like, obviously, that are going to come more and more. When third-party people really start thinking like, oh, I am working with cars, have a lot to do with cars, such as a toll person, but they've never, this is not something that the core business of the car manufacturers is. So this is where I really say, we're going to see a lot of people coming, building skills, building applications in cars that are supporting their own services that are used in cars. And yeah, this is, I think, really exciting, in my opinion.
There was a talk yesterday about how e-commerce is moving increasingly to voice, and I can just see myself ordering groceries while I'm driving. So hopefully maybe there's some integration of financial services in the car in the future. Before we go any further, I'd like to open up this opportunity to the audience for anyone who has any questions. We have a mic runner over here, so let's start with the lady over here.
Hi, I'm fourth generation in the automotive business, and very interesting conversation, but no one's touched on the task of voice integrating with the car to make it a safer drive operationally. Like maybe you want to get out of the left-hand lane because there's 10 cars in back of you, things like that. Are we getting that far with our designs, thinking that far ahead?
I'm going to start because I think I'm not part of this conversation as much, but we actually had a similar conversation earlier. From the design is, when does the car start speaking to you? So traditionally right now, we start the conversation as humans with the machines, and we also usually end them in most designs. So this is actually a conversation we had earlier. It's like, when are we going to go over that threshold and tell the car it can start telling me information? For example, you're not paying attention. We have audible, visual notifications right now, but they're usually like a buzzer or haptic feedback. So I'm gonna leave it.
Yeah, your point on haptic feedback is great. I think those kind of challenges of there's somebody in your blind spot, you're about to make a lane change. Voice wouldn't be a fast enough reaction. If the car told you, hey, don't do that, there's a car in your left blind spot. By that time, you've probably already hit them, right? So I think as we move forward into self-driving vehicles and just assisted technologies, like the haptic feedback of just, all right, my steering wheel just vibrated, I'm clearly not doing something right. I need to check my surroundings before I continue with the action that I was doing. Or maybe the car doesn't even allow you to do it because it knows better than you. The car can see a dozen things, 2 dozen things, where you only have one set of eyes. You can only see one thing. I think that's the future. Voice is going to be more of a convenience factor, whereas all the safety technologies are going to be built into the car themselves.
I think if you think about use cases right now, where we're mostly talking about assistance systems, right? You also have to think about like general design principles about feedback. Yeah? And I was reading a book the other day again, which is called The Design of Everyday Things, and they are also talking about feedback, right? And if you provide too much feedback, you're actually spamming the user. And what happens then is, at some point, the user will get so annoyed or that he will basically ignore all the feedback altogether, right? So you should really be careful about not spamming the user. And this is probably the reason that we also don't see that much of notifications coming in with Alexa or Google Assistant or anything else right now, because these platforms really want to build up trust. And if you now start with what we already have sometimes, or I at least did this with IFTTT on my mobile phone, I got spammed too much, right? I get too many push notifications, and at some point, I will just stop reading them at all. And this is what we definitely need to avoid in-car. And when it comes especially to prompting, like really starting a dialogue and stuff, We were discussing this earlier actually, and we were thinking about, hey, where could we actually prompt the user? And then there was this suggestion, hey, maybe whenever I turn on the ignition, the car can ask me, hey, where do you want to go? And I think this is already too much, because if you're taking your car every day to work, you know where you're going and you know where you want to go. And at some point you will just get annoyed by the system asking you over and over again, hey, where do you want to go? So you either need to design it very intelligent so that the car already knows, okay, you're probably driving to work, so I don't even bother asking, or you don't do it at all actually, and you rather focus on small specific use cases. But I think one of the biggest challenges we have right now is to build up trust. So we really have to think about when we want to prompt the user and give him some kind of feedback.
I have heard an interesting use case around driver coaching, where maybe it's for a young driver, right? And again, maybe you're getting yourself into a use case where you expect this type of interaction, but maybe like a younger driver who's learning to drive, you would get some sort of information, oh, the speed limit here, or oh, you're driving too close to the car in front of you. Again, kind of just to coach the new driver into becoming a better driver, and you could turn this on and off, and you wouldn't want to do it all the time, obviously. But there are some interesting use cases, usually again around a very specific task. But I think that would be a good place to have voice interrupt, especially if the driver is expecting it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, how's it going? So currently right now, I feel that voice in terms of driving and navigation is very mechanical, drive forward, reverse, make right turn, right? As you've all explained that we're moving towards this evolution in voice where it's voice can understand, intent, intuitive driving, things of context, understanding context. What kind of design plans do you guys see or know of right now where that hurdle of context versus actual delivery becomes like a moot factor? If I tell my car drive straight, or go straight, it knows to go forward straight instead of backward straight. If I tell my car, make this right turn, it knows that the immediate next right turn is going to be the right turn to make instead of 2 turns from now.
So when you were saying right turn and so on, you were thinking about really controlling your whole vehicle via voice?
More so in terms of this, you want to say make this right turn, you want your whole car to, make this right turn, but in terms of navigation, letting my car understand the fact that I mean right turn, this right turn, as opposed to the next 2 right turns, as opposed to the next 3 right turns. I mean this next immediate right turn.
I see. So I think when it comes to controlling the car and navigating the car, probably what we will see more, and then even in case of control, because the car will maybe drive autonomously, right? You will probably think more about addresses, and then in the future just places, like drive to my brother, for example, and then the car will take you to your brother. I don't see the scenario really where you can then say, okay, but then take a right turn or whatever. Then you rather say something like, oh no, I want to stop at the coffee shop nearby, and something like that. And then obviously it would be great if the car already knows your preferences when it comes to coffee shops, and maybe prompting you, you usually go to Starbucks, do you also want to go there this time, stuff like that, right? So this is probably more the case we were thinking in right now, and this is also coming a little bit from this smart home perspective. Right now with the Alexa smart home skills, right, you are still thinking, or at least with version 1, you were thinking about turning on specific lights, right? I had this one light bulb I can turn on and a second one. Then they were thinking about rooms, then maybe now we have routines, right? So we were thinking more about scenarios and about scenes. And I think this will actually continue inside the car as well. You don't give these kind of very specific commands anymore. Instead, you're just giving a general setting, driving out for dinner or something, and then maybe I get some reprompts, but then the car takes care of that. And you could even think about triggering this already from your living room. So while dressing up, you could say, hey, I want to fetch some dinner, prepare my car, and then it will already turn on the preconditioning and stuff like that, instead of saying these direct commands and initiating every single step in the whole chain.
Thank you.
So thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation about making the automobile not home but not work, but a third place where I can do things besides just worry about driving from point A to point B. I was interested by what you were talking about earlier with the car's capability to communicate using voice on the state of the automobile. For example, your tire pressure is low, or we've received recall notices, or maybe not recalls, but there are certain OEM or VAR conditions that have come to my attention as the automobile, and you, human, need to decide what to do about it. So I'm curious, have your companies, from the testing side to the production side, thought about incorporating that type of functional knowledge and presenting it to the drivers or the passengers if it's autonomous?
I can't speak on what Ford is doing on that, but personally, I think that things like that where maintenance is required, maybe this isn't the next step in the future, but maybe it's 2 steps or 3 steps in the future, that cars will drive themselves to a shop to get fixed. And then maybe they'll report back to you in some way, whether it's through Alexa with voice or through an email, however it is, right, on what was done to the car to fix it.
We're helping one car company to create a dialogue that is supposed to be initiated by the user, but where you can set appointments and it's kind of set the urgency and set an appointment with a nearest dealership to get this checked out. So if you notice something and you can describe the problem, you can get a appointment set, everything in the car in a very few short sentences, and then information gets set and everything's automatically scheduled.
Thank you.
You've emphasized the importance of the car of being very careful because of distraction and other things in designing these systems. But if you're relying on third parties, machine learning or AI system, those evolve over time. How do you make sure that a year after I bought the car, that the car is responding in the way that was meant to respond when it came out of the factory?
I mean, for that, you definitely need kind of an update functionality. That's the first thing, right? So you can make sure that at least the embedded functionality you have inside the car, which is probably outdated at some point in time, can be updated with the most current use cases. And then, of course, you need some kind of a cloud platform which can actually, or which gets context information from the car. So let's say the car model and the model year. So it can send responses back which are actually fitting to that model. And this, of course, increases the complexity because we already have to think about all these car lines and car models out there with all their sometimes weird specifications or minor things which we needed to be adjusted. So it actually adds a lot to the complexity and makes it even more important to have kind of a scalable approach from the beginning, thinking about like future updates and kind of these regression things ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly if you're looking about ensuring the performance of these systems, we as Bespoken do think that having good automated testing regimens, I mean, that's really critical. It's helpful for any application, but certainly for automobiles where you want to have, ensure that the performance is consistent. That's really an essential thing.
We've talked a lot about function, and I want to ask a little bit about communication or entertainment, or what do you see as being kind of the next big application for in-car voice?
So as I already said before, I think one of the biggest things, which we already saw in the smart home voice controls things, is moving away from these specific commands to kind of scenarios and scenes, right? Like if you're now entering a very developed smart home, you probably don't say turn on this and that light, but you instead say, I want to prepare dinner, or I want to have a movie night, or I don't know. And then everything happens behind the scenes, actually. And I think this will also happen for cars, especially moving on to more and more autonomous driving vehicles, because then you're moving away from these, I have to do specific things myself with my hands, or I even have to drive, more and more to entertainment and productivity skills. And then you're really thinking about applications of voice in and outside the car, where you just want to focus on what you really want to do instead of every specific action, everything on the way to your goal.
I think it's also important to consider that the driver is not the only person in the vehicle. And Jochen, you were telling us earlier about passengers and how they could perhaps play games with voice. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so this is a pet project of ours. We're actually introducing gaming into car, but for kids. So we've all had, had kids in the back seat, and we know that it's quite annoying to them. So we try, when they keep asking, are we there yet, and all these things. So we try to see if we can get kids to play with these smart assistants in the car. So pretty much the idea behind it is, everything we talked about right now so far has been around the driver, the main decision maker in the car. But if we compare smart homes at home, we see that oftentimes it's more than one person talking with it. There's conversations going on between two people and a smart assistant, for example. Or what we see with kids, that they really love gaming on these smart assistants. So we did a traditional German road game, I would say, that we play on the Autobahn about license plate numbers, which is a little bit educational. And we're bringing this into the car to really see, is it something that's going to be used? We're learning here with all of you guys. This is new. So we're really trying to see what they expect, how it's going to be adopted, if people are going to use it. But I really think that in the near future, we're going to see everybody in the car communicate with this device, not just the driver. And there's going to be, more tasks to that.
I thought that was just such a great example with the game. And when we were talking ahead of this panel, our particular mindset is, gee, how do we really make sure these systems really work well? But it's like, okay, it's not just focused on the command and control, that actually you do have this chance to do unique experiences within the car. And for those of you guys that are just general skill developers, I think your idea is great. I had an idea when you said that one, which was carpool karaoke. I don't know if that exists yet, but if it's not,
I think that exists.
It's free. You guys can have that. Anybody that wants to implement it. Yeah. There's interest. I know there's karaoke skills, but I only typically do karaoke in the car. So.
There's a million things coming now. That's like the one thing I really want to push. Like, if you have skills already, customize them, adjust them for in-car experiences. It's, so we really see the adoption. It's going to get bigger. And the other thing is, think of the things you want to do when you're in a car. Like, the really cool things of these open platforms is that you don't no longer need to convince somebody at Ford or somewhere at Mercedes to get your skill into a car. You have these platforms that you can develop for, and you can really, by yourself, push it out there and see if people use it, promote it, and it's an awesome experience. It's something we weren't able to do just a few years ago.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's getting more and more relevant, thinking about these use cases like games, for example, moving away more and more from driving yourself, because these are relevant now and they are probably also relevant in the future. While as, let's say, navigation or very car-specific functionality things are only relevant now while we're still driving ourselves. Yeah.
Letha, do you want to tell us a little bit about the entertainment solutions that you're already providing?
Yes, so I think some of the magic, though, that still is an opportunity to wow people is tying some of these use cases together, tying the content together in a way that people wouldn't expect necessarily. So like for use cases where maybe I want to listen to certain types of media while my son is in the car before I drop him off, right? And so the vehicle can let the system know what the occupancy of the car is, right? And so your recommendations or the information that's displayed to you as a driver might be completely different once I drop him off at school and I'm headed to work or the gym, right? I'm listening to a different type of media, I'm going to a different place, I would expect different places recommendations based on that condition, right? And then as I get out of the gym and I'm headed to work, maybe I want to listen to the news, I want to use my time in my commute. In San Francisco, we have a lot of commute time, productively. So I want to join WebEx conversations or do things very easily from the vehicle. So I think to us, the wow is tying that all together with the vehicle context that's coming into play to make it really smart. Because a lot of the integrations already exist. It's more just now, how do you tie it all together for, to really deliver the wow factor and do it in a way that, again, isn't annoying, it is intuitive. So, I mean, those are the tricky parts.
We have another question lined up. Yes.
What you were saying about like the games in the car, that sounds like a dope idea. But then, like, as you're saying and as I'm thinking about it, it also sounds like a scary idea for the mere fact of like what happens when now. I mean, I'm sure all of us been in situations where, okay, kids in the back seat, parent gets annoyed at any given point in time, right? And so has there been any type of like design or development into like a type of like dual band type of input or output for like voice at all? So where my children are in the back seat and they're playing this game, they can easily pop in the headphones and voice is not interrupted from me switching a lane, and now I get a notification that says, hey, watch out for your left lane, or Alexa me as a driver can still like respond or speak to her as the children are in the backseat playing.
Multiple context.
Well,
Yeah.
I would just say, I mean, so gaming right now, I mean, obviously you would need to be careful about that as a driver. I do think Robert was starting to touch upon this, but we also talked about as you move towards the autonomous car, what are people going to do? Voice is a natural interface there, and so things like gaming and entertainment would become even more relevant. And voice is a natural interface for doing that inside the car. That seems like a fairly realistic vision of what will happen in the future in voice's role.
In academia, we're doing a lot of experimental work looking at what would the car look like in the future if you don't have to drive, and then thinking about like all the window space and like what would you utilize that for. And so I think there's a lot of kind of experimental work looking at that, but definitely this concept of being able to pick up multiple types of people in the car and being kind of a socially aware car is something that we have yet to get to.
I don't think it's unreasonable to think that cars are going to have multiple microphones in them to detect who is speaking and what seat they're in, so that if the driver is trying to play a game, their voice command is just ignored for the sake of safety.
Yeah, but one thing I want to point out here, we're not talking about games that you haven't played before. So the game we're actually doing is a game based on license plate. I don't think you have it in the US, where if you see like a license plate from a certain city, like you add it up. Like it's something that kids have played with parents in cars the whole time, but now the kids can actually play it with Alexa instead of them with the parent. So this is not a very distracting game per se. It's one that's been in cars in Germany at least, for ages, that we're just now putting in a digital form.
It raises one critical point though, which is, and you already touched this as well, so why isn't the car already a platform where everyone can develop stuff for it, right? And I mean, we see this happening with a few automotive companies, which are actually much smaller, but you always have to think and consider driver distraction, right? Because you're actually driving, you're going very fast, and you also have to take responsibility when it comes to all the passengers and their lives, right? And this is a major difference to the Alexa at home, right? And if you think about how you currently develop Alexa skills, I could easily right now actually in production change my small microservice and put a very annoying beep in there, right? And if I do this in a production car skill, this could actually cause a lot of trouble. Yeah? So we need to think about certification, we need to think about mechanisms that ensure that even the skills which are already out there are still working, and not that someone hacked this small little skill from this guy, and now every driver out there gets this very annoying beep as soon as they start the skill, and they are crashing their cars, right? Yeah. So this is one of the aspects which makes it so hard to kind of open up the platform for car manufacturers, because safety should be a major concern.
We're running out of time. Did we have another question lined up? No? So I kind of want to ask your final thoughts. Is there anything that you would really like to tell us that we weren't able to cover today in the panel?
We already covered a lot.
Okay. If not, I have
Exciting
a
time in automotive.
final question. For people who have like physical disabilities who are currently not able to drive, do you foresee a future where they could totally control a vehicle by voice?
I mean, definitely, most definitely, yeah. If you think about, of course, the fully autonomous use case is already a good example, right? But you could also think about use cases which are actually possible today, right? Think about you can order via your Alexa device, you order a ride-sharing car like an Uber or Lyft or My Taxi or whatever, and it arrives at your doorstep, and maybe this skill already asks you, or you can put it in your preferences before, that you're kind of disabled, or maybe you're blind, for example, and then the driver knocks at your door, picks you up. He can already ask you stuff. And then, of course, moving on, when this gets more and more autonomous, the car can also take care of that, right? And then you get some kind of voice signal signifying that the car arrived outside your doorstep. You can just move out. Maybe you get some sound which guides you towards the car, and then you can give in your address using voice. So this is already a great use case. And this already, I mean, of course, enables older people, for example. And at some point when this is really getting commodity, I think that it's a great thing to reduce accidents and increase safety on the roads.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking our panelists today.